part 23 on the Lackawanna Cut-Off, removing the rails from the cut-off, where we'll be having an interview with John Sobotka and Bob Bahrs. Hi, I'm Chuck Walsh, and I'm president of the North Jersey Rail Commuter Association, and we're here in Port Murray, New Jersey, on the old road, and we're going to be doing an interview with these two gentlemen. We're going to be talking about their experience on the rail removal trains on the cut-off in 1984, during the summer of 1984. We're going to talk about a lot more than just that, but certainly in terms of the Lackawanna Cut-Off, that's one part we really haven't focused on, and now we'll get a chance to talk to two men who actually worked those trains, and they'll be able to tell us an awful lot about how that operated and what happened and so forth. So I hope you look forward to that. Here we go. Okay, here we are in a trailer, I guess it is, for the Chesapeake and Delaware. We have our host, who is John Sobotka. This is your office. Yeah. And also Bob Bahrs. And we certainly want to thank you for giving us a chance to talk to you. We'll talk about the cut-off, we'll talk about the removal of the tracks, but we want to get into a lot more than just that. But what I'd like to do is really start from the very beginning, and I'm talking about the beginning. We'll start with John, but tell us a little bit about your background and how did you get into railroading? And you can start wherever you want.
Well, I think it goes back to, as a child, my father was the one that actually got me into trains. During the Depression, he traveled across the United States. He was involved with the Civilian Conservation Corps, and he went from New Jersey to the state of Washington to build national parks. And his stories of 2 weeks on a train across the United States, and got me fascinated. And then, of course, he joined the Army, and there again he was on troop trains from the East Coast to the West Coast. And until his passing, he still remembers what routes he took on the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy. He was on the Northern Pacific, and he could still route himself across where he went and stayed. So he was the one that got me interested in trains, and of course we had the American Flyers around the Christmas trees, and I lived 1 block away from the Erie Orange Branch, and if I looked out my mother's and father's bedroom, I could see the trains coming there. So I think the bug was very early.
And what town was that?
In Bloomfield, New Jersey.
Bloomfield.
My parents lived on Bloomfield Avenue, and the Orange Branch was a block down from us. And as my father seen, I was interested in trains. We'd go out to the weekends. We'd go to the Black River and Western, and he would take me to the Whippany for the train rides. My parents didn't have a lot of money, and so my mother and father could not ride with me on the train. They would just buy me a ticket or my sister for the trip. So, but he encouraged me to get into the trains. So after high school, I worked construction for a couple of years, and I was lucky enough, when I turned 20 years old, I got a job on for the Reading Company, and I worked out of Manville and Port Reading, New Jersey, and that was November 1973. And I worked over there until, I believe it was April of '74, when some of the work, the coal dumper closed down at Port Reading, and the older guys with the seniority bumped me out of Manville. So at that time, the Jersey Central, Lehigh Valley, and the Reading Company had combined rights. So I was able to hire on the Jersey Central Railroad, and I kept my few months seniority with me. So I was a conductor then, a brakeman, and I worked Eport, Bayonne, Jersey City, basically Griselli, Carteret, and Brills Yard, Newark, and I continued, working the Eport area, and up until Conrail, which was of April 1976, and a lot of changes in the industry at that time. We all know there was 6 bankrupt railroads trying to keep themselves together, and it was a lot of changes. A lot of major changes started when Conrail happened. You got to remember, when I hired on in the '73, we were still standing on top of boxcars passing signals with lanterns. We didn't have radios, and we had full crews. You had some jobs had an engineer and a fireman. You had a conductor and two brakemen. And
cabooses, right?
And cabooses, yeah.
Okay.
Numerous cabooses. There was no Freds or telemetries or end-of-train devices. And but I'll tell you, the gentleman that I hired on with, we talk about the greatest generation who served in the Second World War. Well, that spilled on to them after they left the military, and into the 50s and 60s and into the 70s, because they were the ones that rebuilt America. I mean, really, the economy of the United States really grew at that time. So I learned a lot from those gentlemen. These were guys that were at Battle of the Bulge, and I knew one guy that he survived twice. He was torpedoed in the North Atlantic. So this is the character of people that you worked with. You know, they wanted to get the job done. They wanted to get, do the work, safely and all that. So, that mentored me along until we came into Conrail. And like I said, a lot of changes happened on. And I was still a conductor in the early, like I said, in the 70s. I got married in 1978. And for a while, I was an assistant train master for Conrail, and I did some yard master work, and Linden Yard, Metuchen, Manville. But I always still figured myself as a ground grunt. I missed being a conductor. I wanted to go back doing that.
Now,
So
briefly, what would a conductor do? I mean, we think of conductors on a passenger train, but you're talking about a conductor on a
freight service. Well, basically, the conductor is the foreman, right, Bob? Basically, the foreman of the train. The engineer
conductor used to be in charge of the train,
right,
and the engineer only in charge of the engine.
Right.
Train orders were always C and E, meaning conductor and engineer.
Right.
Now the conductor is nothing.
But basically, yeah, basically the conductor was in charge of the train. In other words, what customers you had to do, and if you had a brakeman or two brakemen under you, you were responsible for what they did too. So you would give them orders, to get your job done. So, like I said, got married and dabbled a little bit in yard master and train mastering. And then came in 1987, I had a chance to go to engineer school. And I took a major pay cut at that time. And I went into school in June of 1987. Got out of the we had 6 weeks of classroom, and then it was another 6 months of on-the-job training, and I was promoted 2 days before Christmas in 1987. So that brought me through. I got qualified to Selkirk, New York, Corning, New York, Harrisburg, Allentown. So it opened up a whole new, different world for me as an engineer, as opposed to a conductor. And that's the late 80s, early 90s. I got involved with Operation Lifesaver, the Philadelphia Division Quality Council, labor management projects, safety committees. So Conrail gave me a lot of opportunity at that time to go beyond just being an engineer and conductor. And it's supported my 4 children and put them through school. We had a comfortable living. And I got to say, if she ever sees this, that if it wasn't for the support of my wife, taking care of the kids, when you go on the road, sometimes you're gone, right, Bob, 2 or 3 days, and your wife is in charge of your whole house, paying the bills and watching the kids and getting them to school and stuff like that. So if you don't have support behind you to do that, it's a tough. Railroading can be tough on some people. Some people can handle it, some can't. Bob, you know what I'm talking about. You're in Corning, New York, and you find out your kids are sick. Your wife handles that. Or there's a disciplinary action, a disciplinary issue with my children. She's got to handle it, So I was lucky enough, like I said, Conrail afforded me a lot of opportunities. Then came 1999, when Conrail decided to split themselves up, and we were split up 3 different ways. The shared asset, which is Conrail, Norfolk Southern, and then CSX. So initially at the takeover, I was working in the Croxton area. I had a regular road freight, local road freight. And then the traveling to Croxton from Apacon, New Jersey got a little heavy for me, and I decided to exercised my seniority up in Dover, New Jersey, and that was 2000. And I held that job from 2000 right up until April of this year, of 2019, when the new company leased the former Norfolk Washington secondary and all the work out of east of Dover. So I was afforded a chance, opportunity to come on with the new Chesapeake and Delaware company as an engineer. And then a month later, I was given a job as the assistant system superintendent. And if you know in a short line, you still have to be an engineer, you still have to wash windows, you still have to have the discipline, you still have to worry about customers. So you have to wear many hats on a short line. So interesting career. I'm going to be a little bit longer in my job as a superintendent, and there's a lot of opportunities and a lot of things that are going to be happening with this company, and I'm hoping to help them along a little bit, and then eventually call it quits.
Your fourth retirement.
My fourth retirement. So right now I'm basically looking, we're almost 46 years. It'll be 46 years in November. So.
Wow. Bob, how many years did you have in railroading?
I only had, knock on wood, 32. And I'm happy that it's not going to be 46.
Same questions to you. Tell us about your story.
All right. I grew up in a railroad family, and that my grandfather was a Lackawanna conductor, started out of Scranton in, I think, 02 or 03. I have paperwork that says his first job was on a work train that went down to the new Lackawanna Railroad Bridge over the Delaware River, which would have been the one that still exists at Delaware, not the Cut-Off Bridge, but the one down at Delaware. Anyway,
so that's 1903 or
so,
somewhere in there.
Yeah, and my father, after he married my mother through my grandfather, got a job as an engineer on the railroad. He started in 47. We lived along, till I was in second grade, we lived along the Chester branch in Succossana. I could see the trains from where we lived out the backyard, across the sand pit in Succossana. I did go over one time when my dad was a fireman on the job, and me and another little kid, I remember it was an RS3, and we went over and got on, and we rode all the way out to Route 10 and back, and we were out on the side of the running board. My dad never said a word, but I remember going across Route 10 and people looking up, and there's two little kids on the side of the running board of an RS3 going across Route 10. And he didn't say nothing, but it was a good experience. We moved to Dover when I was in third grade, and grew up going down to the railroad station and hanging around down there a lot. I remember my dad getting called, answering the phone, and the guy would say, Red Rover, let Richard come over. I thought that was unique, only to my dad. Well, later on when I hired out, I talked to Mike Farrell, and he said that the guy used to do the same thing with him. Mike was about my age, and his dad was also an engineer, and the guy would say, Red Rover, let Charlie come over, meaning Charlie Farrell. So I learned that my dad wasn't unique. He told everybody that. In 68 and 69, got out of high school, and between those summers going to college, I was a fireman for one summer, and I was a ticket agent the next summer, which gave me a good exposure to both sides of that aspect of railroading. When I got out of college in 70 with an associate's degree in data processing, I kind of knew that I wasn't ready for the railroad, and the railroad, which was at the Erie Lackawanna at the time, wasn't ready for me. There was a lot of old school bosses, and you couldn't have long hair, you couldn't have a mustache, you couldn't have a beard, you couldn't, I wasn't ready for it. So for the next 6 years I wore a suit and tie and did a couple jobs associated with data processing and accounts receivable at a couple different companies. And in 1977, I was out of work. Conrail had just come along. and I decided to give that a shot. Bill Shepard helped me get a job, and I went from suit and tie to dungarees. And in reality, it was one of the best moves I ever made. Like John said, supported my family. I had a stepson and my own 2 kids. So I raised a family of 3. Like John said, wives of families that work on the railroad, of men that on the railroad, they do an awful lot, including my wife. So from that aspect, I started out in train service. I'm proud that I got to see basically every aspect of railroading, and that I started when there was a full crew, no radios, everything was hand signals. I worked all the way through when you lost 1 man, and then when you lost a 2nd man, and then you were down to just a single conductor. I worked through all that. I worked yard jobs, locals, through freights, and they're all rail and passenger service. I worked a couple of years before New Jersey Transit became New Jersey Transit on the former Lackawanna area in passenger service. So I did a little of everything. And
what did you do there? I'm curious about that. What in passenger? What did you do there?
Trainman and conductor.
And take a collector also.
On the electrics?
On the electrics, on any of the passenger service that was former Erie Lackawanna.
Okay.
The Hoboken board, full uniform, still have my jacket. So for some reason I can't fit into it. Still have my hat and badges.
Shrinkage.
I have the coin changer. We used to cut a lot of cash fares, and now I look at the guys. Nobody cuts a cash fare anymore. Everybody buys a ticket at the ticket machines. But we used to cut a lot of cash fares.
Or waves the phone.
Come home with a wad of bills like that at the end of the day. So I probably was in the same situation as John, where you said 87, they allowed anybody to wanted to be an engineer to go to an engineer's school, and I did not want to. And I don't regret that a minute. I always enjoyed being on the ground. I enjoyed that aspect of it. It never bothered me. I liked being out in the outdoors, rain and the snow. Probably the worst was when it's about 35 degrees and raining. That was not swift, but other than that, snow never bothered me, and rain, if you had the proper rain gear, that didn't bother me. I worked right up until, like I was telling you before we started, I was on 21M to Harrisburg and back every 3rd day, and I enjoyed the job. I disliked the ability. They had 2 jitneys in North Jersey for the NS, and they did away with 1 jitney, so there was 1 jitney to handle all the crews.
Or let's say taxi. Some people know what a jitney is.
Taxi, yeah, jitney, van.
But it was something owned by Norfolk Southern.
Well,
or at that point Conrail, right? Or it was NS?
NS, under NS, yeah. That was the other thing. We had to make a 3-way decision when Conrail was being split, whether to stay with shared assets, go with CSX, or go with NS. The only reason I went with NS is they were taking over most of the territory that I had previously worked. So I went with them. That's a whole other story, whether that was a good move or not. But that was the last 10 years was a tough 10 years, let me tell you that. Yeah, they got rid of 1 jitney. So now when you came back from Harrisburg and you wound up at Port Newark or Oak Island or Port Reading, you were at the mercy of that 1 jitney that was being used in yard jobs for yard moves at Croxton, and when he could get to you, he could get to you, and that was it. So I was worked about a year and a half past when I could have retired, and when that happened, I said, nah, that's it. And I don't regret it. I'm busy as hell every single day. 12:30, 1:30 every morning. Busy. The old term of how did you get through when you were working, and you got more busy now than I ever was. So
So the length of your days, because I know you both talk, say the same thing, that your families had to endure your hours. I guess you would say you had to endure them, but they did too.
There's a lot of missed dinners. You can never join a bowling league or a volunteer fire department because you're working the extra list. You're on call, and at that time it would be a 2-hour call. They call you up and say, it's 5 o'clock in the morning. We need you in Jersey City at 7. Now, and if you know anything about the metropolitan area, at 5 o'clock, that means at 5:05 you should be in your car heading down because of the traffic. It was very rough, and sometimes I really regret that I didn't, was able to make the sporting events and all that. And the same thing with Bob with his young kids too, growing up. And it's a sacrifice you make sometimes,
Working the extra list was tough, and I figured out over the 32 years, it was probably somewhere between 20 and 21 years I was on an extra list, which meant you never knew when you were going to work. Sometimes you had an idea, okay, but sometimes that idea went right out the window, and I had a second phone just for the railroad. We kept that right up until the day I retired, and when I retired, we got rid of it. But
explain the difference between, because some of our audience will be rail fans and people who are familiar with railroads, and some won't. So explain how, and this is where we're going to, I guess, segue onto how we get to the cutoff removal, the rail removal trains. But explain how this works with the assignment of crews and how the extra, because they're going to be like scheduled trains and then there's extras. How does that work?
A work train was always an extra.
A work train was extra.
Okay, called off the extra board that covered the territory that it covered, and the rail trains for the cutoff were off the Croxton Road extra list, which is where I spent most of my time and John a lot of his time. And
so how does that come about? So in other words, there's some trains which are going from point A to point B every single day, or point B to point A.
Right.
And now that's not the extra list, is it not, or is it?
The extra list covers an extra train, a guy's vacation,
sick,
a guy marks off sick.
Oh, okay. So you fill in for somebody else.
That's right. Okay. You don't know when Joe Blow is getting sick tomorrow, or when Joe Blow is getting sick at midnight tonight, and they need somebody for the 1 a.m. job, and you just got into bed and now the phone rings. And it was many a Saturday night I just got in bed and the phone would ring, OIAL. Oak Island, Allentown, okay, because nobody else wanted to work on a Saturday night.
But now here's a question for you that there's a point at which, let's say you've had, if you're lucky, 2 hours sleep, and now you're going on duty again. I mean, is there a
No, you did it.
You did it.
You did it.
You just did it.
When they did start at the re-electrification, I think it was early 80s, they would have numerous flagmen out to protect the contractors working on the Morristown line and the Gladstone. And we'd go through the Croxton the Croxton brakeman's list would have 25 or 30 men on it every day, and that list would turn. They would use that many men for the flagging jobs, plus the local freights, plus if there was any extras. So that list was revolving. So like getting back to your question, like now the rail train, if the first rail train might have been called an RAI, or rail, or just an extra work train. And what would happen is if they were ready to start ripping up, they needed the train, the rail train itself. They needed locomotives. They needed the track department to be all in place. So sometimes it didn't always jive. It didn't always work out. So the rail train might have been called maybe on a Monday on one week, right, Bob, or a Tuesday on the following week. So sometimes it was always not always consistent. When it ran the train.
All right. Well, let's talk about the rail train. The removal. What would be for the removal of the track from the cutoff? When do you guys start? Because it starts on. I think you mentioned it, Bob.
I have the one nice thing I always did is I used to see my dad's time books.
I think it's June 8th was the first version
and
he started.
He kept a meticulous time book, and I used to see his time books, and I started to do the same thing. Now nobody keeps a time book because it's all in a computer.
Yeah, I was
And
service, yeah.
nobody has a time book. But in a time book, you went the engine, the date, the engine number, where you went on duty, where you went off duty, the time you went off duty, the rate that you were being paid, whether it was through freight, local freight, yard rate, or passenger rate, and the amount you think you should be making, and who you worked with. If you wanted to write down the names of the crew members that you were with. And I used to write notes in my my time book, and I have in here, I just opened to July and August. I got third empty rail train for the cutoff. It was on Saturday the 28th of July '84. So since then I've highlighted it in orange because we've talked about this numerous times. But I would write notes in here, you know. First day back with Conrail. By the way, I didn't mention that I was furloughed for 17 months from Conrail. That was tough because I was working 1 or 2 days a week off what they called the limbo list.
Limbo list. I was on that limbo list too.
And the limbo list was you would only get a phone call when they've exhausted every single other list on Conrail, of which there was many lists. There was a yard list, a south yard list, a north yard list, a road list, Croxon road list, Meadows road list. So when they've exhausted all that and they couldn't find anybody that was qualified on that particular area that that train wanted to go, then you would get a phone call. And sometimes it was once a week, sometimes it was twice a week. I started selling cable television in the evenings. I would go sell cable television to make money to support the family. And finally, the unions got together and they said, no, time out. These guys either have to be told that they're working or they're not working, and they officially laid us off. And that was the time when Ben Friedland was taking over operations on the Chester branch, and he needed a qualified conductor and I needed work. So it was a match made in heaven from that standpoint. And I went to work with him, and it was nice, and it was 8 o'clock start every morning in Morristown, as opposed to some crazy hours, and I knew where I was going to be every day. In the days we ran freight, if it was over on the Morristown line, former Morristown and Erie, Roger Cozart was the conductor and I was the brakeman, and we were fine with that. And when we left Morristown and came up to do the Chester branch, I would become the conductor and he would become the brakeman, and we were fine with that. We both got paid conductor's rate for the day, and that lasted 17 or 18 months. And this was right when the cutoff was getting ripped up. So I wasn't around for the first couple of rail trains, but shortly after that, I got an official letter from Conrail calling me back. And it was kind of a tough decision because, you know, it was nice 8 a.m. Monday through Friday, but I knew in the long run that there was more work available on Conrail than there would have been for the one job on the Morristown and Erie. And obviously that worked out because now the Morristown and Erie is 1 day or 2 days a week where...
Yeah, there was a period too that I was furloughed from Conrail too. And like Bob said, you would get called maybe once or twice a month, and you had to think about your family. So if you worked that one day just to keep your insurance policy going, you know, that was the most important.
And your credits for railroad retirement.
Because you
that was even more important.
Right.
Of those 18 months I was furloughed, I lost 1 month of credit because working for the Morristown and Erie was railroad credit, railroad retirement. Mm-hmm. So that was really, really important.
And the same thing with me. There was a period of time I was working for a neighbor. He was a surveyor and engineer. I actually had to work with him with a surveying crews to bring money into the house. And I went back into construction for a while just to keep things going. But like I said, right, Bob, how many times we get called on a rainy, cold night or something like that for an extra? And you had to do what you had to do, you know, just to keep it going, you know.
Work like from like beginning to end. I mean, at the very beginning, you're dealing with the trains taking up rail at the western end of the line.
Well, It was funny because, not funny, I remember reading that the abandonment notice was actually in the newspaper. And I was working Dover, and Bob was also working Dover on another job, and I pointed out to you that the notice was actually out from Conrail. And I guess there was, I'm going to say maybe 60 days or from that point that basically the company could start ripping the railroad up. And I think I told you about that. And so we knew it was coming.
Yeah.
We just, and that, I think that was summer.
You had to be on the Croxon Road Extra list then,
as a
because he got called for the train, the very
First
first
train.
rail train. I think probably an Allentown crew brought it to Port Morris.
They brought it to Port Morris.
Okay, so the first morning that the Croxon Road crew would get it to actually go out on the cutoff via the west leg of the Y was John. And I remember talking to John that morning on the phone, and John was talking to the M&W guys, and they were saying, oh yeah, they're meeting in Washington, or was it Philadelphia as we were speaking, whether or not this is actually going to happen. Well,
Yeah.
obviously it happened.
Yeah.
And, they shoved the train all the way to the Delaware River Bridge. And
Well, yeah, we ran up to Greendale.
up to Greendale, yeah,
But,
right around there.
but what had happened was before that summer beginning, they started bringing the what you call it, the switch heater, the blower, start melting the snow off the rail because the cutoff was full of snow, and they actually got rid of the snow on the rail so they can come up with the spike puller. And the spike puller would probably pull out of a section of rail, he would probably pull so many spikes, but he would leave like every third or fourth tie still spiked. The rest of the spikes were taken out. So just to get them prepared. So they started basically from the river and started working east. So that winter before the summer of demise, you could see it was coming. And like I said, I got called for I was the brakeman on the job, and I think it was Jimmy Wharton was the conductor, and I don't remember who the engineer was. And it was bittersweet because we knew it was coming, and like Bob says, we were.
Oh yeah, there was guys in Hoboken that were really mad at me for working those jobs. Oh, you're ripping up our cutoff.
Yeah.
Well, if I don't do it, somebody else is going to do it.
Of course.
All right, because I'm doing it doesn't mean. Now, what I did do is try to photograph as much as I could for posterity, but yeah. If I didn't work it, somebody else was going to.
It was sad, and like I said, I don't have the engine numbers and all that stuff, but it was sad. Like Bob said, we were waiting for that call from the governor's office, to stay the execution.
First rail train, June 19th, which was a Tuesday.
June 19th. Okay.
And
Is that the first one you were on, or was that the first one?
I was on, yeah.
Very first one.
Wow. Okay.
Out of Port Morris.
And we deliberately, and I'm being honest about it, we deliberately tried to drag our feet a little bit because we were waiting for that phone call. I mean, we've tried to find everything possible. I tried to find everything possible to slow that train down another minute or two, because there was a lot. You got to look at what that railroad actually hauled and how important it was at one time to see something as brilliant as it was to be ripped up. The track supervisor said to me, he said, if we were going to put this track back into service, and how long was it furloughed? I mean, basically dormant.
About 5 years.
He said even in being dormant for 5 years, they would have made that railroad at least 25 miles an hour. So that's how good that railroad was maintained up until that period. So we like I said, honestly, we found everything wrong with that train to slow it up. The dog ate the homework. I forgot my lunch. I got to make a phone call. I have to go to the bathroom. The engine's not working right or something like that. Just waiting. We were hoping. I know Morris County was talking about somebody riding to the rescue with a check or something, and
there was so much going on behind the scenes.
July
And
5th, Thursday, second rail train.
so, but
So the first rail train would have been loaded up with rail, presumably.
well,
Is
not
that
necessarily, because
Really?
what we did was we brought the train up to Greendale, and but first we knew we were going to run into problems. Was once you left Port Morris, you come up to a sweeping curve, and Bob probably knows a little better what I'm talking about. Somebody had removed about 300 or 400 ties from beneath the rail for landscaping purposes. And what Conrail had to do was actually safety tie that piece of railroad. Basic safety tie is one tie every 3 or 4 feet.
By West Port Morris.
Yeah. and basically just to get the train over. So it looked like you were going over a Lionel track. It was just enough to hold the gauge, and you had to walk the whole rail train over that. So, and I think typically the rail train was about 28 flat cars, and they're three-tiered. So you had to walk this whole menagerie over this. So that, of course, we said, let's drag our feet a little bit more on this, just to slow it up a little bit. We got up to Greendale, of course, the interlock. What they had done was, before we came, they purposely went and took all the signal, the maintainers' locks off all the interlocking signals, boxes, whatever. So they were heavily vandalized at that point. The interlocking at Greendale, of course, not working. So we pulled the train up, cut the locomotives off, and the switches to get around the train had to be manually. They were controlled switches. We had to manually get them over to get the locomotive around to the east end of the train. And then from that point, from Greendale, we shoved up to the bridge on the Delaware. So
when you get down to the bridge, now I guess you've done as much delaying as you possibly can. Somebody has to go out there and what? Do you actually go out with blowtorches, or you just take the last pieces of rail and disconnect the joints, or how does that work? I'm curious.
Well, once basically we got up to where they wanted us to stop the train. So, and basically we applied all the handbrakes and we tied it down for the night. They already started pulling the spikes behind us towards the river bridge. So the next morning, the actual operation of pulling the rail came up. So, and basically it's a cable system that comes from one end of the train, runs through the cars, and basically you're cabling it. They'll cut a hole on the side of the rail and put a hook on it and just start pulling it up. So you pull up one side, they reset, and then you pull the other side up. Now, once they pull that section of up, like I said, it fits on 28 cars, and each car was 50 foot, so you're talking
Quarter mile.
Yeah, quarter mile they'd be pulling up.
So you have to measure that out before.
Well, they would have it, and then once they pulled up those sections of rail, they'd have you pull up the train, another 28 car lengths or so. You stop it, and then they start pulling the next length up.
So now, in theory, that could be done pretty quickly, but this will take all the way until October to get all the way to the end. And is it like these trains are happening on a regular basis, or is there any kind of breaks?
5 days a week.
Yeah, but you would work the train, but once it got loaded, the train may sit for a while before they actually took it back to Allentown, and I went to Harrisburg to Lucknow, I think it was, because what they were going to do was, if it was stick rail or whatever, they were going to cut the stick rail off the end of the rails, because what happens over time on the joints, your rail starts to bend down. So at Lucknow, what they would do is chop off those bad ends and actually weld it. Now, supposedly all this rail was going to go into a yard rehab project somewhere on Conrail. So
yeah, because there's at least, I don't know if you call it rumors, but there was stories going around that it was urgently needed for some reason. And
not necessarily. To be honest with you, no. Like I said,
Those were stories.
Because really, like I said, once the train was loaded, if they didn't have the crew to move it from Port Morris to Washington to Allentown, or from Allentown to Harrisburg, that train might sit for days and days. It wasn't top priority. Now,
I just remembered something that the mornings we talked from Morristown. At the time, there was a guy named Tucker Lampkin, and he would show up at Morristown every morning and go in and use Ben Friedland's office all day. And this happened like a couple weeks before the first rail train, and right through that, where we knew he was making these phone calls to buy the Cut-Off. And then there was all sorts of rumors, well, they want 21 million, or they want 19 million, or they want 30 million, and they're close, but they're not jiving, and okay. And I don't know if he was a banker or a lawyer. Okay.
He was a banker.
He was a lawyer, okay. Or a banker.
He was a banker.
He's a banker. And
go ahead.
Apparently he was trying to do this on the side, slyly, on behalf of CSX.
That's true.
They were trying to get that as a way to get into New York, and obviously he failed. And the funny part of the article is when he was all done and he didn't show up anymore, he left Ben Friedland with a huge phone bill. I'm sorry, I interrupted you, but I just remembered that. He was there, he'd be there like several days a week for hours and hours in Ben Friedland's office trying to make deals on buying the Cut-Off.
And there was rumors that the Ben and the M&E Railroad were going to operate.
Yeah, and if that happened, then I would have stayed with the M&E and all that.
Yeah, there was, in other words, it would be like a ghost company that they'd be working for. So there was rumors. I know you mentioned something about people putting spikes back into the track and all that. We never seen that.
You never saw that? Okay.
No, they were still pulling spikes out. I'm thinking back. I was driving here. I was thinking back though too. Is we had a lot of issues with locomotives up there being vandalized, and in some cases I think it was just more than the local kids, okay, that were doing it, because some of the damage to the engines were very, very deliberate. You remember that? I mean, we would.
That's what I was curious.
The obvious one was the day we left them on the west portal of Roseville Tunnel.
Yeah.
Because it was a Friday, and John was on and I was on, and we said, next Monday will be the last train through this tunnel.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we need to get some pictures here.
Yeah.
Okay, we parked the engines right at the west portal of Roseville Tunnel. When we came back Monday morning, fire extinguishers, flares and fusees, windows were broken, spray paint, the engines were a mess. And I remember having to call the dispatcher and telling him this. And he made some kind of remark of, we're using more engines to rip up this Cut-Off than we are running trains. You know, it was kind of, he was annoyed about that. Now they had to, meaning Conrail had to come up with 2 more engines somewhere, get them up to Port Morris, and get the old engines out.
Yep.
And that
They
could
weren't
take
operable?
literally days because, whether they came from Oak Island or Allentown, then that was a separate crew that might be qualified as far as Netcong, might be qualified into Port Morris, but then they weren't qualified to go out on the Cut-Off, which was Croxton Road area jobs. So we would have to get those engines come down, grab the engines that you couldn't start, take them back to Port Morris, set them over,
and then go back.
and then the Allentown crews would have to then maybe the next day jitney up to Port Morris and get those engines and get them out. So
this is all wasting days of
Well,
yeah.
The train wasn't always constant. Like you would have a crew, you do so much. They may not have a crew for that train for a couple of days. It sat out in the middle of nowhere. Because, right, Bob, like you have enough people, so other jobs would be full. I remember meeting the crew. We would meet at Port Morris, and I live in the Pacon, and the crew would drive out themselves. I'd go back home, and then around 11 o'clock in the morning, I would have their lunch order. I'd go buy them lunch and go meet them someplace out there, and give them, bring them lunch, coffee, or whatever it was. And there was times that they would leave me with the train. They would take my car back to Port Morris, and I would be on the train myself. And it's not legitimate, but when they say pull the train up another 28 cars, I was the only one there. I pulled it up to another 28 cars. So there was times that we had to drive back and forth with the track department.
Sometimes, if we knew where the train was, we would drive out to, like, say, Andover or
whatever it was,
Greendale.
Yeah.
Okay, and we'd park, and the track guys would make sure that we got back to our car that evening.
Yeah.
Okay, at the end of the day. Or if the train started at Port Morris and we left our cars at Port, the track department would see to it that somehow somebody would take us back to our car. Or one of us would drive with the train, drive out to where we were going
and start from
and be the rubber wheels for the day, and at the end of the day be the rubber wheels to get the whole crew back. Mm-hmm. Nobody knew where we were. Nobody knew. Yeah. Nobody cared other than just get that rail ripped up. Yeah. You would report to the dispatcher in the morning. You'd say you're such and such a crew. You would call, I think, the Lehigh Line dispatcher,
and they would care less.
And they would write your name down on some dispatcher sheet
that you were up there.
That you were up there, and up there was somewhere in North Jersey.
Had no idea where you were.
So you guys were out of radio contact, or was there any?
Oh yeah, there was nobody talked to us up there. We were under.
So when they used to say we don't know where the train is, they literally didn't know where the train was.
The track.
I mean, they knew where you were.
The track supervisor would know where you were, but the dispatcher wouldn't know where you were.
Okay.
And he didn't care.
He didn't really care.
He wasn't running any trains against you or around you or through you.
It was
He
just
didn't
out of
care.
service. Yeah.
Okay.
It was out of
He
service.
just had to literally write on his train sheet that you were on duty that day, and that's.
And I did the same thing with Bob. I was taking a lot of slides up there also too. If I brought my camera up, and it's sad some of the places that you take that you would say the saddest part was I took a picture of an SD40 and a caboose sitting at Blairstown Station, and that was the last that night when we tied up, and I said to myself, tomorrow it's all gone. There won't be no more engine at Blairstown. You know.
We did get the pictures at Roseville Tunnel.
Yeah,
we got night shots.
Yep.
And they came out well.
Yeah.
And then the next Monday morning,
It was gone.
it was the last train through the cutoff, or through the tunnel, and I took pictures of it coming through the tunnel. I got pictures. We stopped the train, and it was Jimmy Giordano and myself.
And that was it.
And I don't know if it was Wharton or who it was, but we stopped the train. I got pictures with the tunnel there and the engine, and I thought that would be the last train ever to go through that tunnel. Some year now, there's going to be a transit train that will go through that tunnel.
But again, I have fond memories of. We used to get heavy thunderstorms during the summer through there, and I remember it was the Lackawanna gods punishing us for what we're doing to their sacred ground, and black snakes. Because black snakes are harmless, they don't bite you or anything, but there was always black snakes in the ties. And I remember some trackmen to I guess joke on their supervisor, their foreman, gathered a bunch of black snakes and put them in his truck. So when he opened up the door, it was like Indiana Jones. I hate snakes, and they were under the seat and all that stuff, and everybody got a big laugh out of that. He didn't think it was funny, but you would do that. Most of the trackmen that worked up there were out of Scranton.
They were former Erie Lackawanna or Lackawanna men that worked out of the Bloom or from around Scranton, and there was no work up there, so they would literally roam. And they would come down here, and they'd stay the week down here, and then they'd go home on weekends back to Bloomsbury.
A lot of them were big Scranton boys, I'll tell you. Big,
So as you get towards the end, I know that eventually you do finally rip up the last piece. Now, Bob, I know there's that iconic photo, I guess, with your son on the locomotive. Are you on the? Are you? Either you guys on the last
John
train?
made the sign.
You made the sign.
I made that at
John made that sign.
6:30 in the morning of the last day. I had a piece of cardboard.
So the world can thank John for that.
October 5th.
And he put that on the engine, and he told me about tomorrow they're going to take the train west, and that'll be it.
Yeah.
And miraculously, I was off or got done late in the day or something, and grabbed my son, and we went up, and I took a picture of him on the engine. And those are the things that, you're really happy you did.
Yeah.
I mean.
And it was right around that date also that I lost my mother-in-law. So.
And the other thing I remember is that
Yeah.
I think it was 5960 and 5962 were GP8s.
Yeah.
And they were the two ex-Lackawanna Jeeps that Conrail had sent through the GP8 program.
Yeah.
And we got the 5962, which was not a Lackawanna engine. And I thought we missed it by one number, one number would have been an ex-Lackawanna engine going through the tunnel for the last time and coming off the cutoff for the last time.
Yeah, because they originally took the railroad up to Port Morris itself up by the tower, and then the last move we made was towards the west end of the Y, coming around the Y, and I remember there's a whole group of people, locals came out and took a number of pictures, and some people asked my name and stuff like that. It's all lost, I guess, but we had the engine around the Y there, so there were some pictures taken. So
there's a photograph out there of Bob. You were on the front of the locomotive coming through Port Morris Yard, and the grass must be about 3 or 4 feet high. Yeah. You can't see the tracks or anything, but you're on the front of the locomotive, and the train's coming through the yard. I presume it was the rail train, of course.
Yeah, I took some pictures of Westport Morris shoving out there. I don't know, one of the trains coming and going. Jimmy Wharton was in the picture, and somebody else.
This is a Mike Del Vecchio shot, though. I think.
And it was the same way. The weeds by that time were pretty high. Yeah.
Now, did either of you gentlemen ever get to actually run or ride a train on the Cut-Off?
Me, no.
I hired in '77, and I was working out of Hoboken in passenger service, but I was on the extra board there, and it was a Saturday night, and I called up, and there was nothing showing, and I was second or third or four times out, and nothing showing, and I actually went out on a Saturday night, and it wasn't till like, I don't know, Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday, I bump into Paul Bohr. And he says, "Where were you Saturday night?" I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, you missed a call." Well, I didn't miss a call. I didn't get dropped because it was a job I didn't have to take. But they called me for light engines to Scranton. And that was my chance to have ridden
All the way up?
all the way across.
Oh.
And I was out. And it was a case where the crew caller didn't know that they were going to call light engines to Scranton when I talked to him earlier in the evening. And it was with Paul Bohr, who was a great guy and a quasi-rail fan, and you know, we could have talked all the way to Scranton, and it was a one-way and deadhead back, you know, jitney back, and
Well, I mean, that's, you never know. I mean,
Well, ironically, when was the next? Was it 2 years ago? 3 years ago, the first rail trains came back for the Cut-Off, and I happened to be the engineer on the first train, bringing the first and second train.
that's 2011.
Yeah.
It's, right around, it was in December of 2011.
Yeah.
and that rail is still rusting away. No flanges on it.
No, that's right.
No flange wear has been found on that rail yet.
Yeah.
It's in perfect condition.
So it's kind of full circle to bring it back, you know. And you took a picture. Remember that the first train we came up, we pulled it in the Port Morris yard.
I don't remember, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, because then the New Jersey Transit pushed it onto the Cut-Off, and they emptied off all the rail there, which you're pointing out.
Mm-hmm.
Much of which is still there. Some of it's been laid out there, about 4 miles, but there's still quite a bit that's still at Port Morris.
Mm-hmm.
I have this crazy question that I want to ask you guys. You're railroaders, and this goes back to the 1958 runaway, which Bob, I know you're familiar with. Maybe, I don't know, John, if you are, but a bunch of cement cars and a caboose get loose from Port Morris and start westward.
Are you familiar with this?
Yes, I think I am.
Well, I wrote an entire article on the whole episode.
Yes, I know you did. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So, is there something I didn't cover?
No, but
Well, not everybody gets that magazine. That's what he's looking at.
There is a question.
But everybody should.
No, they don't. They don't. They don't.
Well, part of this question, I mean, of course, yes, Bob, because you would know all the details more greater than I would on that. But John, as an engineer, this is the crazy question I have, and this goes back to, we did an interview with Jerry Cruz out of Johnsonburg, and he tells the story that he was a kid, maybe 7 or 8, and they're at the creamery in Johnsonburg, 1958, and he sees the string come past. Followed, he said, 5 minutes later by an RS3 engine going as fast as it possibly can, trying to catch it.
An RS3 engine?
He said an RS3. I don't know if that's true. That's what he said. I'm quoting him out of Port Morris. Yeah. Now this would be before your time, but there's the story about the set of cars that got loose at Port Morris. I'm not sure if you know about it.
Yeah, it was the cement cars. I was up here at the time. We saw them go by.
Where were you at that time?
At the creamery up here, the picture I showed you there.
Oh yeah, at Johnsonburg.
Just got loose and started rolling. And they rolled and rolled and rolled till they got to the cutoff there, to the water gap, and they went too fast around the curve, and they all went down to drink there. I think they're still there. You went down there and scuba dive, because that cement got hard as a rock.
So you couldn't pull them up.
Football, I think they're still there. I don't know, but
I mean, was this something that like you all of a sudden you happen to be there, and all
I
of a
just
sudden,
happened to be there.
and
So what the
there's
hell is
this.
caboose. I don't know how many cars that had, but that's cement cars. And 5 minutes later, an engine going 100 miles an hour trying to catch it. Never caught up to it.
Oh, really? So there
They-
was it because there's that legend that the engine actually tried to catch, and I
The
kind of
engine
just.
caught it, yeah, because I saw that go by. Trying
Really?
to catch them, yeah.
But he tried to catch it, but he
Tried to
didn't.
catch it, never got up to it.
Wow.
Yeah.
So wow. I didn't. That's a. I always thought that was just like, a
An
big
engine
story,
was-
but
An engine was chasing. I saw the engine. I might have been 10 years old, but I saw the engine.
wow.
An old RS3. I just got away from it.
So how? I mean, this is like asking a really off the wall question. Any guess as to how fast the cars were going? Because if the engine's going as fast as he could, there are different estimates I've heard, but no one. I don't know if anyone really knows for sure, of course, but.
The cutoff, right about here, is the highest point on a cutoff. So it's downhill to Blairstown, it's downhill to Port Morris. They had enough. Yeah, I can't explain it. They were rolling. Those cars are going uphill from Port Morris to here. But they had so much. I don't know whether they tried to couple onto it. And if a coupler doesn't work, it's not going to latch. I think somebody gave it a hit, and away they went. They hit it so hard that it pushed it over the knoll. Once they got over this knoll here and going down toward the river, it picked up speed. Because instead of rolling uphill going 20 miles an hour, it got going 50, 60 miles an hour. For, I don't know what the speed limit around the water gap was, but it was, I'm guessing 30 miles an hour. If you had a freight train or passenger, you slowed down to go around the car, around into Strasburg Station. I don't know what the speed was at the time, but it was going way too fast. No way would that thing get around that curve. It was too much weight. As soon as it tipped, it was you were done.
Huh. Okay. Well,
You're lucky you didn't have another train coming. That would have crashed into it.
Well, part of the story, and once again, this is trying to recollect from what others have told me, but there was a story that there actually was an eastbound train. That's why I was asking you about the
Eastbound. I don't know. They probably held it at Bell's Bridge. Bell's Bridge is.
So you were in Johnsonburg at the time, right? Because the story I heard was that there was this eastbound train that went. Once again, I don't know if this is true. Somehow, by the signal indications, knew something was coming at him. Dove into the siding there and got in at Greendale, and got in just in time before the cars that were running loose went past it.
Okay.
Once again, I don't know if that's true.
I haven't heard that one.
Okay. Well, that's part of the version I had, but I hadn't heard that. Well, you were an eyewitness, so you saw that engine going after the thing. Amazing! Wow.
The engine was going quite fast. He just, as soon as that, I don't know how many was in the string, 7, 8, I don't know. But as soon as it went, the highest spot is right here, not Johnsonburg Station. It's right over here. After that, it was, no, you're not going to catch that one. The runaway got to just picked up speed. It's like going right along.
That's quite a story.
Just an accident. Somebody didn't tie a brake down. If they had put a brake on one of the cars, that thing would never got going the way it did. But somehow that air bled off the train too. Lost its air.
Yeah, I heard someone lost his job because of that, but unfortunately nobody.
Probably.
What are they trying to do? They're trying to.
They're probably trying to catch up to it. Because
couple onto it and stop it, basically.
Probably because and it happens today too. Is whatever cut of cars it was, the crew did not set enough handbrakes on it. Okay, or it had no air at all.
It was bled off. They bled it off.
Okay, it was bled off and it ran away on them. So in other words, they didn't have enough manual handbrakes on it. So on a grade like that, a loaded car, it'll take off like a rocket. So
which it did, but then Bob, you can tell the story. I mean, what happens?
The cement cars headed by caboose 866 were approaching speeds that HB7 reported to be almost 80 miles an hour. The other event that one employee claims happened is that the radio from Port Morris Tower, which usually was never any good at contacting trains, especially as far away as Greendale, was reported to have worked. All right. And then the engineer was, I have him listed in the article. They stopped at the only train order signal on the Hoboken Division, or Morrison Essex Division. The only train order signal on the whole division was eastbound approaching Greendale. And he set that to stop and take siding. The engineer was Al Ebol, I believe his name was, and he either heard the radio or he said he saw the signals going, because that was a long straightaway, like 2 or 3 miles straightaway, and he could see the signals dropping, coming, so he knew something was coming at him. He went as fast as he could into the siding. And I don't know if this is myth, but it's been handed down through many a Lackawanna railroader that it was so close from him pulling in and the train's going west that the markers touch. Now, that could be myth. I can't swear to that.
I've heard that story.
Okay,
yes.
but it was very, very close. Okay. If that train order signal hadn't been operating, that head end crew on NE4 coming east, they would have been killed. Okay, in 866, the caboose was the only steel caboose assigned to Port Morris or assigned to the whole Morrison Essex Division at the time. All the other brand new steel cabooses were sent to the Syracuse and Utica Division, or the local from Binghamton to Buffalo, or Elmira to Buffalo. So the 866 was the only caboose in Hoboken or in Port Morris because it was assigned to the cementer. And after that, guys chalked onto the side of the caboose, "Scab caboose needs no crew," because the caboose and the first 2 or 3 cars went around the gap curve. The rest of the train went into the river. Okay, the caboose went as far as up near past Bell's Bridge and bottomed out, because then it starts to go uphill towards East Stroudsburg. And
that's hell of a long journey to keep going, because that's amazing. After that, because it's going around a 40-mile-an-hour curve at close to 80 miles an hour, basically.
It didn't. The caboose was light, so the caboose hugged, but the loads.
Well, but you're saying, but part of the train survived. In other words, stayed on the rail, whereas the rest of it
caboose and a
just
couple
went
of
into
cars. Yeah.
Okay.
The rail started to give away at that point.
And those cars are still down there in the river.
Yeah, there's trucks and there's at least 1 or 2 cars that divers have confirmed are down in the
still
river.
down there. But that's like about 70 feet of water in that one part there, 50 or 50.
All the floods and everything, it's probably silt and
But that's why I was asking John the question. And like today, I mean, not that we ever see this happen, but I mean, for the set of cars to lose their air and then just to start to wander away.
Right.
Um,
Would anybody try to pull
under NS? You can't. Every car has a handbrake, no matter where it is.
Yeah. Well, there's always been instances where a crew makes a mistake and they're trying to correct that mistake.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so by him chasing those cars with his locomotive, he's probably, I mean, if he had caught them, that would have been great. But he would have probably faced numerous rules violations by going by stop signals and running through switches. And
well, the other thing, and I interviewed every live Lackawanna person that either was around the Lackawanna or worked at Port Morris that I knew of. And it said in the article, I state that HB7 got permission to go see if he could catch him. I don't know if they crossed him over onto the track that the cement cars were rolling on, or whether he just went on a parallel track. I don't know that.
Oh, because of course there's still 2 tracks in the
There's
cutoff.
still 2 tracks all the way on the cutoff, yes.
But at some point, they're single tracking same year.
Within months of this incident, they single tracked, and that train order signal became history. Was taken away.
When you say train order signal, what is
train
that?
order signal? Is a normal signal with a circle, a PRR style light underneath it, and if the three lights were up, it signified something. If you were at a 45, it signified something, and if it was at a horizontal, it signified something else. It's all in the Lackawanna rule book. One is stop and call. The other is stop and take siding, call and take siding, and the other is take siding. You know, it's all in the Lackawanna rule book, 52 rule book.
So that the eastbound train, it sees that
Came up to that, NE4 came up to that signal, stopped. Now it's a matter of whether or not the guy got on the phone, or the radio worked, or the guy saw the signals dropping. He told the guy to throw the switch, and he just went. Okay, what happened? Nobody will ever know. All those people are dead.
Okay.
What happened within minutes or seconds of each other? I can't.
But he takes the siding and gets out of the way just in the nick of time, basically. Huh. Yeah. It's an amazing story.
And the reason, they came up the slow track at Port Morris, which is right on the hump, between the two legs of the Y. That's the pinnacle, the highest point. And this is back when the Lackawanna, these cars were hot cars for the L&H. Okay, somebody bled them off. Okay. The yard job went to couple up. The pin didn't drop, or the coupling didn't make. Okay, but it pushed them. Okay, they gave it another shot, and the pin didn't drop again. Okay, and then I don't know if it gave them 2 shots, 3 shots, 4 shots, but every time the pin didn't drop, they didn't make a coupling. Now the cars are rolling. So doesn't matter if he might try 10 times, he wasn't gonna couple. So now they're rolling, and there's nothing you can do. And there was, again, these are all things that guys told me that I didn't put all of them in the article, but Roy Weedman was the switchman that was trying to make this coupling. A guy told me he only had one lung, and that therefore he couldn't run fast enough to get to when these cars started to roll, to get to any handbrakes. Another guy said, well, yeah, they went to couple up, but they had already made a standing cut. All right, so the standing cut started to roll, okay, which was 18 cars that way. So, there's a lot of conjecture there as to what happened within seconds, if not minutes. But obviously they rolled,
So part of the train is it starts to roll down the grade, and are there like cars in between that are still sitting in Port Morris? In other words, if you have an engine, let's say you had it ready to go and want to go catch them, are there cars in between, or is it straight ahead? Those cars are just wandering away, and
HB7 was there, and I'm sure HB7 was this guy that went and tried to catch him.
Okay. But he's on a lark. It's sort of like hoping that he can stop this string, because he's not going to have any brakes. He's just going to. The idea would be to couple onto the train and slow it down
and
little by little.
Yes, and then put his brakes on. But whether or not whatever happened there, it's all history that nobody will ever know. The only thing we know is he didn't catch him and he didn't couple.
So we don't even know how far he went. We know he went at least as far as Johnsonburg, and we're still going, but we don't know how close he got, or where he called off the chase.
You got to figure there's a few seconds between everybody reacting to it too. I'm sure you looked at it and couldn't believe that's happening, and now you have to think of how to stop it.
The different people I interviewed, I got slightly different versions of what happened,
Right.
and I had to mix it all together. What made sense and what didn't make sense.
Not the whole crew might have not been at that same location at the same time, and now somebody had to make the decision on what to do and get going. So
the things that's come up, and I'll ask you because you're railroaders and you would know routings and such as well as anyone, and be sort of impeccable type of sources. There have been people who've been talking about freight returning to the cutoff. When I talk about freight, I don't mean a car or two that might go to Greendale and all that kind of stuff. I'm talking about the 100 car plus type of, the real major railroading there. If they put the tracks back tomorrow or a year from now or 2 years from now,
Melatonin makes you have deep sleep, and when you're in deep sleep, you have a lot of dreams. Okay, and that's all those are, pipe dreams.
I don't see because the major railroads, CSX and NS, is that was on the cutting block from day one with Conrail, because I hate to say it, Scranton is no place. It's just now that Binghamton is important. So the way, especially with the double stack equipment, there's high restrictions on that, and they developed Harrisburg as a terminal basically. So
everybody has their route already.
Right.
They don't need that, and the millions of dollars they would have to spend.
that's my
Never
question.
got it.
I mean, if somebody, because the question it has come up and it will come up again, that not much we can count on. People are going to say, oh, they're going to be running these wrong trains, trash trains of the whole 9 yards. And the thing is, like, well, if you were going to do that, how would you do it? How could you possibly do it?
Well, the way the system's set up now, it's
Pipe dreams.
It's all pipe dreams. Yeah, I mean, everybody was afraid of what Turco was going to do, Mr. Turco, because he bought the property, and a lot of people don't know what his plans were. He wanted to put the railroad back to take the fill cuts out that the Lackawanna had built, bring that to the waterfront, say Hoboken or Jersey City, and barge it over and build up the west side of Manhattan, or Westway.
Yes.
And then when in return, what he wanted to do is bring garbage from the city back out to the countryside and fill it in. And that's why the communities up there put in soil removal ordinances so nobody could do that, because over the years the land has changed, the ponds, water levels, water tables, and that had all changed, But that would be my fear of him bringing garbage up and taking dirt out. But as far as running double stacks and oil trains, that time has come and gone.
Yeah, and even though
Look at NS. They don't run anything even via Port Jervis because they have to run on New Jersey Transit. And that's a total nightmare if you had to run on it. And over here you got wire, which means it's a double nightmare.
so you'd be restricted to not only in terms of time but also in terms of height.
Right.
You'd be able. What would you be able to, like a C plate? I don't even know what the limit
plate
is.
F, over 17 foot. That's what they're looking for.
Because you of course as an engineer have run underneath there, but there's only certain cars you can run.
Right. Like in Summit, New Jersey, the height there is 15 foot 5 inch. So right away, there's no way they can run up the Morris and Essex side, Morristown line, and it's all the industry.
What fits under 15 and a half?
All their passenger equipment.
Well, yeah, but I mean, I'm talking about
but
freight cars.
freight cars, no.
Nothing? Or anything?
Just your normal 50-foot box car, your rail box type.
Okay.
But anything now, the industry is going towards this plate F, which is a higher box car. The days of the rail box cars that were built in the 70s, they're maturing out now, and they're being cut up. So you look at the whole industry is changing in the last couple of years now with this clean sheet. Allentown no longer humps cars; they flat switch. There's trains being diverted to Harrisburg as opposed to coming out of Allentown. So the industry is changing, and for somebody to think that the cutoff is going to be a major.
Well, I think what we hear, and this is from people who would not want to see the cutoff come back. So
Right.
they're coming up with, and this is nothing new. This is back 25 plus years ago. We've heard this, but we just expect that it'll come back again. And it's, but there've been things that have been done that make it even less likely now. I mean, with the boot line being removed.
For the last 25 years, I constantly get asked, do you think the cutoff will ever come back? And I said, well, maybe for passenger trains, maybe in my lifetime. Maybe. Okay. Now it's possibly for passenger trains, possibly in my lifetime. Okay, maybe they end over. I will never see a train go all the way across the cutoff in my lifetime. Not going
Well,
to happen.
you know, you got to look at other alternatives besides a locomotive and push-pull cars. You can go to light rail, a trolley car system, or you know, it doesn't necessarily have to be a regular conventional passenger train. You know, it's a shame that they never put the service back in, because you have the national park at the Delaware Water Gap. You know, you know, and I know the business interest in Pennsylvania would like more people to come out of the city so they can sell more houses and stuff. But really, to eliminate some of the traffic on Route 80, that's what really should be thought about, you know, and especially for the environment too.
I think that's really going to be the angle they're going to have to use. And it used to be, I understand this is a change now, that they used to only be able to consider commuters. Now they can also look at off-peak passengers as well and add those potentially into their ridership figures, the potential ridership figures. So that kind of stuff, you know, it's a possibility. I don't think I agree with you. I think you'll probably get to see it, but you know, because if you get to see it, I probably get to see it too. But in terms of, you know, passenger trains going over the cutoff, but you know, this is a very difficult project because it's not something anybody.
It may get to Andover. In my lifetime, it's never going to go past Andover.
But you know, it's just I know
Well, we'll see. We'll
some
see.
of the municipalities.
Stick around though. Wait and see.
I would like to stick around. God lets me do that.
Yeah, I know some of the municipalities have actually raised the acreage for a house. Okay.
That's true. Yes.
Because they want to protect their interests. And I think some of them, not in my backyard, are thinking that if they open this Golden Gateway, there's going to be condos and everything up in Alamucci and Tranquility and all the way up there, and that in Greendale. And I doubt if that's ever going to happen.
You know, you mentioned the high car situation with the wires.
Mm-hmm.
Working the night job out of Dover, which I worked too many nights. But
Especially Sunday nights.
Bobby Apgar. We're going down. Transit comes on the radio. Something to effect, call me at Morristown, or stop at Morristown, or back your train off at the scale track at Morristown. So we get there and I call him. He said, "Did you hit the wires?" I said, "No." He said, "Well, we had a PI, power interruption." And I said, "Not that we know of." "Well, I can't let you go any further. You got to back your train off at the scale track," which we did. And I don't know. I guess we did Dairy Pack, but we didn't. Well, the moral of the story is there was one high car in the train that didn't have the wide white stripe across the back end. Okay, which all high cars
At that time,
had
yeah.
this white stripe. So people are saying, "Well, you made the brake test. How come you didn't see the high car?" Well, it didn't have that white stripe. Plus, when you're making a brake test, you're looking at wheels. You're not looking at the top of a boxcar. The moral of the story is what we did is that boxcar hit one of those braces that come out at 45-degree angle between the main pole and the support that goes across. It just clipped that. All right. So that gave him a power interruption. About a week or two later, this car came all the way from Allentown and made it under the bridge at Phillipsburg. And anything that ever made it under the bridge at Phillipsburg was always okay in Dover. Mm-hmm. Well, apparently this car scraped, okay, and got through the bridge. Somehow they lugged it through, probably scratched the whole top of the car coming through, and it did hit the wire, or the brace. About, I don't know, a week or so later, I get a phone call from the superintendent in Allentown. He said, "Listen," he said, "you didn't do anything wrong." He said, "We now, as in Conrail, have to upgrade and update all our clearances, because they only had clearances on all the main lines. They did not have clearances on any of the secondary lines." And it was right after that they made a huge effort to put the clearance chart out on what the clearance was on every single track that they owned. So,
And those in-car going underneath we're talking about the catenary now, that the electrified trackage east of Dover, there has to be a certain amount of clearance. It isn't like you have 1 inch. It has to be more than an inch because you can have arcing, I presume. What's the?
There's
How close can you get? Is it without having
your answer from the ET people, electric traction, but there is a little give way. But I have my one locomotive was 15 foot 3 inch, and we can go to Summit at 15.5. So,
okay, so that's
you're close.
You're close,
You're
huh?
close. Because electricity can jump. If there's moisture in the air, it can jump. Humidity, it'll jump. So, yeah, it's very close.
You've had to have them come to Dover to measure your
Oh, how
engines
many
and cars
times?
like dozens of times, right?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Especially in box cars. Sometimes box cars, when they offload it with the forklifts, they'll lift the forklift up. They punch the roof, so the roof might be the car might be 15 foot. Now they punch it up 6 inches. Now the car is actually 15 foot 6 inch. So when you read the side, it says 15 foot. You think you're good to go, and then now you have an issue.
And now the load came through, which is 1.5 to 2 inches lower. The springs are down.
So
Now the car gets emptied.
now she raises up.
There was one car that never went back downtown because whether they took all the springs out of the truck, right?
Just to
And
move
they-
it.
Just to move it through the bridge at Phillipsburg.
Now Phillipsburg is going to be lowered.
Yeah.
That's projects coming up in the next couple of weeks. So basically, they're going to take the track out, dig it all down. They're going to use steel ties to get some more clearance, and it'll be good at least 17 foot, 17 and change maybe. So, but it's a lot of money. There's a lot of effort to do that for clearances.
So as let's talk, because we're getting towards the end of the interview, and talk about what you guys are doing today. Of course, John, you're still actively in railroading. You're still going.
Mm-hmm.
Bob, I know in the past you've done lots of interviews of railroaders, and
I have
what keeps you
literally
busy these
30, 40 hours of tapes of old timers. I've devoted my life to the Lackawanna. I've interviewed every Lackawanna guy that I could possibly come up with. There's only 1 or 2 left, and I have 30 or 40,000 slides that need to be scanned or done with, and I'm still writing articles and busy every single day. And I've been getting into birding, doing birding photography. I've always done photography my whole life. And the newest thing is capturing warblers,
Oh, yeah.
So, but anyway, I'm busy every single day. I keep my flower gardens and everything else. I don't regret retiring 1 second.
I'll tell this story, and it's about John Williver, and who we both knew. I don't know if you would have known John Williver, John. But
I think I met him at least once with you, Bob, at some event.
Could have.
Yeah,
Yeah.
from Washington. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
yes. He passed away about two years ago. It would be now. And Bob and I were both pallbearers at his funeral, and but we had just started this series on the Lackawanna Cut-Off, and this is that was at the end of 2016. So somewhere about the beginning of 2017, I called John up and I asked him, would he be willing to do an interview? And he declined. He wasn't feeling well, and he said maybe in a few months if I'm feeling better. And it turned out he wouldn't be feeling better. He was actually unfortunately declining. But at that point, he asked me. He said, well, "Why would you want to interview me?" And I'm thinking to myself, because you're probably the greatest living Lackawanna railroad historian.
John and Alvin Smith were my mentors, and I'm trying to carry on with what they started and instilled in me on knowing how operations worked and where things went, how everything was. And I speak to Alvin 2 to 3 times a month. He lives out in British Columbia. And beyond those two, there's not too many other people around. There's nobody else that becomes an instant Lackawanna fan that wants. There's some model railroaders, but there's not many people that are interested in all aspects of the Lackawanna.
Yeah, because when I was talking to John when he had declined it, but then I made the mistake of, in a sense, of mentioning thinking my thoughts out loud. I said, well, the reason why I'd like to interview you because I think you're the greatest living Lackawanna Railroad historian, and he had been kind of somber throughout the whole interview, and all of a sudden he jumps in and says, "No, I'm not." And I'm thinking, okay, thinking, who is? And he
Mention
says,
Bob.
Bob Bahrs.
Well, everything I got from John and Alvin, and then went from there. Put it that way. If they started the bug in me, put it that way. So.
Yeah, but yeah. So you got a good recommendation. I mean, John. I remember John. We both remember John and the old days where he had that fire in the belly and type of thing, and that's the John I miss, more than anybody else.
Yeah. Towards the end, he would always say, he'd always mention his age. Every time you talk to him, within the first 3 minutes, he'd tell you how old he was,
Yes.
and that he can't remember that much these days. And I'm still getting the same way, where I forget so much I can't remember that I used to know. But I have learned that all my interviews now are recorded. That way, what somebody says is gospel. You don't think about that recording 20 years ago and did the guy say this or did he say that? Here it is. My problem is the first 10 or 15 years I was doing that, I was using one of those little cassettes that has a tape, and I would interview like the BMP guys, Carl Oxford and Louis Supres. Well, Leo Supres. Leo had a real strong voice. But on all my interviews, when I'm listening to Carl, he's talking like this. And I have to turn the volume up to listen to Carl, and turn the volume back down to listen to Leo, turn the volume up to listen to Carl, turn it back down. Where the new digital ones are so much better.
Yeah.
Now, those tapes, are you transferring them like to digital? Because I know from my own experience, cassette tapes have a certain lifetime.
Yeah, I did a lot.
Are the quality still there? I mean,
Well, look, the quality is what the quality is. Even when it went to digital, the volume is up and down, up and down.
well, I'm thinking, but in terms of preserving them, because if there's
I do have them all on a hard drive.
Okay.
One hard drive, yeah.
Yeah, I was never really a big Lackawanna fan. Even though where I grew up by the Erie Orange branch, you went over to Watts-Sessing Avenue, that was the Montclair branch, of the Lackawanna. So, but by the time I really realized what railroads are railroads, it was Erie Lackawanna at that time. Bob was really the only one that got me sort of interested. I'm not too interested in brown cabooses, but it was, and what I found
I got John interested in the Lackawanna, and John got me interested in cabooses.
Yes, that's true.
Cabooses.
Yeah. So
John got me very interested in cabooses, and he and I went around to
yeah.
good half dozen yards that Conrail had stored cabooses, and we came up. I still have a file this thick with hundreds and hundreds of cabooses, and the good and the bad on each caboose.
Right.
And we picked out 14 cabooses that we wanted preserved, representing each railroad,
Mm-hmm.
and on some two different cabooses for
Right,
like
right.
a large railroad. And we through John Fiorello, we got it okayed from Alan Skimmel, who was a corporate secretary on Conrail.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, I thought, okay, we got these cabooses preserved.
Mm-hmm.
Well, little did I know, being naive, that just because we did this, that what was that guy's name who was head of asset distribution?
Whitehead, Mr. Whitehead.
What is it?
I think it was Whitehead or something like that. He was
No, there was
asset
somebody else. There was a guy named head of corporate assets. He didn't know, and he's selling cabooses right and left. And it wasn't until the Lackawanna caboose that we had on our list, he sold it to Dave Monteverdi, to the guy up in Buffalo. And I found out about it. I said, Dave, how'd you get that caboose? He said, well, I just asked for it and I got it. And that's when I looked into it. And we at the time did not have a place for Conrail to send 14 cabooses.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Ben Friedland really wasn't into the railroading end of it at that point in time. So there was no place to send 14 cabooses. So the fact that we didn't have a place to send them, we lost them.
But
And at the end,
we
when we lost the 14, I said, well, we better get something out of this. And that's when we got the 3 for Tri-State.
But nobody thought it was an LN&E until we did some research into it, and then we found out.
John knew about all the little differences between an LN&E caboose and a CNJ.
So we were saved. We at least saved 3.
Yep. Actually, there's of that 14, I think the URHS got 2 or 3,
Okay.
of which one is now sitting outside the station on the CNJ down there,
Westfield or
West
something.
Fanwood or something, and I don't know. One is in Booton, you know. But
One last question, and Bob, you asked me before we even started the interview to ask you the question. I'll ask the same of John. And reflecting back, and this can include anything, but what are you most proud of? I mean, is there something that you could look back on, or that you?
But like I said, like I said before about I was able to support my family and stuff. You know, raise 4 kids, and now I have 5 grandchildren. You know, all my kids went through college, and I was proud of that. That my wife and I were able to get them through. My son is actually a doctor now. He's in his 3rd year of residency, and I think my doing the right thing at work and working hard on the railroad, like I said, it provided for us. I think back of days of working 37 days straight, you know, without taking days off. You did the same thing too and stuff.
I didn't go 37. I
Yeah.
think I went 17 once.
What 37?
And there was some quits thrown in there, and that's the only reason I got the 17.
But getting involved with the different programs that NS had, Conrail had, the labor management programs, safety, Operation Lifesaver. I look back at that and I really enjoyed that. And plus the fact of being promoted as an engineer. You know, there's a lot of opportunities I had to go up into management I turned down, and that was basically because my family, to me, was the most important thing, is staying in North Jersey as opposed to being transferred to Toledo or Buffalo or something like that. So, but no, I enjoyed it, and that's why I'm still hanging on here for a while. You know, I do have other hobbies, not as, you know, I'm a military historian. I collect military vehicles. I'm involved in the Forest Fire Service. I'm a member of the PAC-on CERT. So it's just more than just the railroad. But now I've got an opportunity to enjoy that, you know, as opposed to when it was really hot and heavy and working the extra list, you know. So, but I'm proud of my career. You know, I have a good safety record. I was on NS in, what was it, 2009. I was a nominee for NS's Hammond Awards, Safety Award. And I went to Washington, and I was facing off with other railroaders across the United States. I did not win, but I was proud of being at least a nominee with that. So, like I said, I enjoyed what I do. You know, and that's why I'll stay around a little bit longer to do this. You know, it just you know, what experience Bob has and I have. We want to, not only the historian, but you got a whole new different group of railroaders coming up, and you're trying to, you know, all the pitfalls and what stuff we learned by hard knocks. We want to pass them on to the next guys. You know, and I don't always bring it up, but I was, and Bob knows this too. Is like over the years I went to 6 different funerals of railroaders that I knew personally, knew their families that were killed on there, out in the railroad.
Yeah.
So it's very serious what we do out here. And I don't wish that upon anybody, but I'm proud that I never got hurt. The same thing with Bob and stuff, and we have a good safety records and good work records. And that's something when you think about what we're handling out here every day. So that's the stuff that, you know, what you feel like you achieve. You know.
Yeah, you talk about the funerals. I'll never forget Dean Bucksbaum.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Croxton Road extra list sometimes was down to like 3 people. Okay, myself, Dean, and 1 or 2 other people. And we would work together. If somebody knew that they were going to be off next week, they'd say, listen, next Friday I'm not going to be here. So you'd know that he was going to be taken off, and if you were right behind him, expect a call type thing. And Dean was a great guy. He was riding a shove.
On the end of the tank car, yeah.
83rd Street,
Yeah.
81st Street on the Northern. And it's where the Northern goes under the river line. And a tractor trailer came right out and hit him, and he was pinned against the wall of the abutment and died. And that was one of the worst nights I ever had to put on the railroad, because myself and Chuck Gardner were called for NB 39, which you drove out and you did Siemens lead work. And we had to, by the time we left North Bergen office, we knew that Dean had died. And I had to work that night. Chuck and I got done in about 5 hours. We bada bing, bada bang. And I didn't tell Chuck, but I knew where Dean lived. So about 11:30 at night, I went to his house, and all the railroad officials had left, but his wife came to the door crying.
Yeah.
It's a bad night.
Yeah. Very bad.
Bad night.
That's the stuff that sticks with you. It really does. So.
Well, I take it the guys must be close. You know, you guys you spend a lot of time with each other.
Some guys you were real friendly with, other guys you didn't give a crap about because they were SOBs. But you know that.
But some of them you
When-
did.
yeah.
You know, some of you did.
Listen,
care about.
when you work with somebody and his wife makes cookies or cake, remember, you know, and they bring it out and they talk about your families, they talk about the kids and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, there was guys that were hospitable and were normal family people, and then there was other guys that you didn't care what they did because you just didn't relate.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I think that's in any job. There are going to be people you're going to somehow click with, and going to be others that, for varying reasons, personality and such, it just it doesn't matter as much. But I can tell that there's your connection, because I know the job, of course, is running trains, but obviously there are people who run trains.
Well, you spend, it's funny sometimes, you spend more time in that cab of a locomotive than you do in your living room or in a caboose.
John's son wrestled for many years.
Yeah.
Okay, I started my son wrestling in 2nd grade, wrestled all the way through, and he got into high school, and as a freshman, he was going to, because he was lightweight, he was going to start as a freshman. As first, I think it was 98 or 101. And I decided that previous year I had missed a couple of his tournaments, and I said that's never going to happen again. So when wrestling season came around, I took a night yard job at Oak Island,
Just to make
which you avoided Oak Island at all costs. Oak Island was the armpit.
Yeah.
And I took a night yard job at the east end of Oak Island that started at, 11 or midnight, just so that I could go to his matches. And I made all of them. So, that was, but I had enough seniority at that point in time to hold a last trick yard job at the east end of Oak Island.
Yeah,
but I never had seniority to hold any kind of decent job whatsoever. Occasionally the night job out of Dover, which, night job, always night.
Yeah.
And I was always the youngest guy. In other words, I was old in age, but I was always the bottom of the list when it came to seniority. And seniority on the railroad is everything. Okay, if you don't have seniority, you don't have any. You're not going to hold anything.
Either you can work days, but you might be off Tuesday and Wednesday, or it wasn't always a weekend off, so you had to work around. I had an incident with my son. He was about 7 years old, and he was walking home from school one day, and the neighbor's dog got loose and bit up his leg pretty bad, and he had to go to the hospital and all that. He recovered fine, but he was suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder because of that attack. It was very, And during his treatment, toward his sessions, he had a recurring dream about a dog coming through the window of the house after him. And the doctor was talking to him and like, where's your, talking about where his mother was. He said, my father's never home. So when you hear that, you realize that you're not part of the children's life. And I did the same thing as Bob did. I was working an extra list, like same thing, being away for 2 or 3 days. You suddenly were like, whoa, what am I doing wrong here? So then same thing, I took a yard job that I was off. I was home for the kids in the morning. And, you can make sure to get off and get back okay, and then you work, afternoons and stuff. But you do that kind of stuff, because you don't realize, like I said, my family's supportive, but you don't realize working the hours that we did, 20-something years, 25 years on the extra list, how much it radiates off you and how your family's affected by that too. And that was a wake-up call for me. It was just like, you take a pay cut, but if it helps, you do that kind of stuff. So a lot of people don't understand really the other side of the fence here. It's not all glory of being working on the railroad. There's you miss a lot,
Well, that's the nature of the
You know,
of the business.
Right, you know what you're getting into, and like I said, if you have a wife and family that could work with you now. It's a lot different now on the railroad now too. They have, they have regulated times. It's tightened up a little bit, and you can only work so many hours per week, which is federal law now. So you can no longer work 37 days in a row. It's all changed. So you got more. You're not making the money you used to, but you got more real time with the family or hobbies.
Well, I have to think also in terms of safety that a person
Right.
who's working that much. I remember years ago I got a cab ride back in the days when you still get a cab ride on New Jersey Transit, and the gentleman who was in the locomotive, it was a diesel locomotive. We went from Hoboken out to Dover on the Booten line, and he was nodding off between stations. I don't know what you call it, the dead man's brake, whatever, making noise, and he hit it. But
Acknowledge it.
he was on medication, and he was getting drowsy, and I'm wondering at what point do I have to shake him so that we stop for the next station, that type of thing. But I guess of course if you have also,
and that's a 38-mile trip. Try to make a 197-mile trip at night.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
it's tough.
I
It's tough.
had occasions where I'm on the extra list out of Port Jervis as an engineer, and you call up, there's nothing showing, you're second out, first out, whatever. So I'm up from 6 o'clock in the morning with the kids all day. They get back home from school, the dinner time, the bath time, the bedtime and stuff. So now it's 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night, and you think you're done for the day. They're calling you for a road train out of Port Jervis, either go east or west. So you've been up for 15, 16 hours already. So you just had to bite down on it and get going. Just 2 cups of tea, and then away you go. So then you could be on the road for 12 hours to get to the hotel, and then put you in a hotel. So you're talking what, 38, 40 hours that you could possibly be up. So thank God a lot of that's all gone now. But that's the life. That's and you got to think back when you're talking about the Lackawanna and back in the 50s and 60s, there was 16-hour rules. They could work up to 16 hours, and then they went down to 12 hours. So you can imagine what kind of life those guys had. Right?
Yep.
But Bob, you were saying that the Lackawanna did its best to try to avoid where you would get to the point where you would outlaw.
When you were on the CNJ or the Reading, did you ever know of a crew that had to use a jitney?
No.
No. And I was
Yeah.
telling them that on the Lackawanna there was no such thing as a jitney.
Yeah.
A jitney or a taxi was never heard of.
Right.
The dispatcher always got you back to your home terminal.
One way or the other.
And it was up to the conductor and the dispatcher to make sure the job got in. And if you didn't get in, there'd be hell to pay for somebody.
Yeah.
Okay, you had to get back. And that was pretty true under the Erie Lackawanna, I think.
Yeah. Even Conrail to a certain extent.
I can remember crews out of Scranton, occasionally Portland coal trains with jitney in one direction or the other to
To
Portland
get
to
the
train.
train, yeah, just to,
But other than that, there wasn't too much jitney until Conrail came along. And then after Conrail, jitneys just
The taxi
exploded.
line, yeah,
I mean, just exploded.
the taxi.
I mean, there
line.
was Rensenberger and all those other outfits and Louis Limo and Easton that, you know, they were run ragged. You know, they'd have like 10 drivers.
Isn't that expensive? I mean, to basically.
Yeah.
Not to mention you have guys that are stuck in middle of nowhere or someplace miles.
That was the thing, okay? Some guy that speaks broken English, you're telling him you're at Joe Blow Lane in some town he never heard of. Okay, how does he get
You
there?
had GPS. There were no GPS.
No GPS. It wasn't even cell phones
Not
back
even
then.
cell phones.
All right. So you wait and you wait and you wait and you wait. You call a dispatcher. Well, they said they left. Dispatcher calls the jitney dispatcher, and the jitney dispatcher tries to contact them on a radio. Can't. So yeah,
I remember.
there's hundreds and hundreds of stories about that.
I remember taking a train up the Southern Tier. I think it's CP Nobody up
Yeah.
there, and we tied a work train down, and we had to walk a mile or so through somebody's backyards to get up to Route 97 to wait for somebody that's coming, maybe coming from Monticello, to come pick you up. So you're sitting on the middle of the road, every car going by.
It wouldn't be too bad if it's a 50-degree day or something, but it could be in the middle of the night, or it could be a rainy, or it could be in the middle of the winter, or
Yeah. So, but it was nice weather that day. So, but there again, yeah, it's quite interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I was happy I made the move to the railroad, and that by the time Conrail came along, PRR rules prevailed, and all those strict Hoboken rules kind of went out the window. And if you wanted a beard, you could have a beard, or a mustache, or sideburns, or long hair, as long as it was presentable. And yeah, I supported my family on Conrail and eventually the Nazi Southern, but yeah, I was happy I did it from a monetary standpoint, even though the hours were crazy. From a monetary standpoint, I raised a family.
And I get from speaking to both of you that in spite of all that, in the sense of sacrifices you had to make, that you enjoyed what you did.
There was a lot of guys that didn't.
Yeah.
There was a lot of guys.
Am I assuming, or did you enjoy doing it? I mean, that's.
Oh yeah.
It wasn't so much that you were happy as you weren't. You didn't hate it.
Okay.
Okay. There was guys that hated it, absolutely hated it.
Yeah.
Okay.
For this the obvious reasons, or it just doesn't match because I would think because if you have a family, it would be
Oh,
tough.
besides making money, they just didn't like what they were doing, and it just made the day long. Like you can get called for a job, and you just say who was the engineer, who was the conductor on the job, and then right away you're going to work thinking, well, it's going to be a funny day. We do crazy things. I mean, not, or if it's going to be that guy. The whole day was going to be miserable. For
So
the
the personality, the personality.
There was a day that John, myself, Sam Calciati was the engineer, I think,
Mm-hmm.
and we were on a work train on the Newark branch.
Yeah.
And we had the whole branch to ourselves. So we did the work, but we also got a switch stand.
Yeah.
We under the Greenwood Lake, so that we got
Pictures of trains.
an over an under and overshot, and it was enjoyable days like that where there was nothing hanging over you, nobody watching you, which that came along with the ENS.
And you play little jokes with each other and stuff like that. And stuff like that. It made the day go light.
Yeah, it was. I remember one guy, he would always claiming there was a golden insulator, carnival glass they called it, and he would always point out that this. Did you see the carnival glass up there? Carnival glass.
Yeah.
one weekend I got that carnival glass. I got a second piece, and I put the second piece in his bag. Never said a word. Never said a word after that.
After that, I mean, I worked with a conductor that was actually, he would take rope and tie it to the old telephone poles, which used to be the signal lines, and pull the poles down, and he would cut the copper off it. You know, for spare money.
Yeah.
That was.
I know exactly who that was.
So you know,
he would get free oil from customer A, walk 1 block, actually pull the engine 1 block, go into a diner/restaurant and sell the oil to that restaurant.
Yeah, cooking oil, yeah.
Olive oil.
Olive oil.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Yeah, there was some cartoon characters out here, you know.
And,
So how do we end this? I mean, any last thoughts? I mean, what?
Well, I'm glad that you got us together to do this interview.
I'm glad I did too.
You know,
I mean, really.
because once Bob and I leave, I mean, we're
you got about 27 more hours we could probably talk, but you know.
There's a lot of stuff that I
I was
wouldn't
telling John,
want to take.
see this?
What is
I
that?
am proud. This is a brake stick.
Okay.
Okay. NS came around. They were pushing these things. You had to put a brake on and off with these things.
Instead of you actually climbing on the freight car,
Yeah.
you could stand to the side of the car and actually use that instead of really, you know, going up on the car, which is in some cases.
So for a while they were like, if you wanted one, you could have one. I never took one. One day they came to Suffern and said, "This is your brake stick." I said, "Okay." They left. I put the brake stick behind the door, and I never used it again.
Yeah, it's probably still there, man. Yeah.
Now, every trainman you see, he's carrying. He's literally carrying one of these stupid things with him. I call it.
That's the new railroad.
Yeah, that's the new railroad.
So.
And any thoughts? You know, because you say the new railroad. Any thoughts on where we go to one? You know, just a crew of one, or even driverless type of.
That's going to happen within the next 2 years.
Really? Okay.
Well, I'm figuring the next 2 years will be engineer only, with the positive train control that's coming up, and what.
We're talking, of course, freights now, but.
Well, on freight trains they'll just be an engineer, and eventually they'll become robot trains. Because with positive train control, a lot of people don't know that Homeland Security has their foot in there too, because. And the way the global world is now, global terrorism, they want the ability to stop trains. You know, if something, or a hazmat train or a passenger train, now they have the capability of just pushing a button, that train can stop. And the railroads are all on board with this now too, because originally the railroads were fighting positive train control because of the cost and all that. But overall, what they're looking at is, in a long time, it's going to be money saving for them. So it won't be very. NS has come out publicly the last 6 months that's what they want to do. And I'm sure CSX, Burlington Northern, and they're going to be along the same thing. Union Pacific. So, because labor is a necessary evil. So the more people jobs they can cut. That's, you know, Wall Street runs the railroads nowadays. Railroaders don't run railroads.
Every time you think they can't cut anymore,
You know,
they do.
A lot of work.
And the next CEO that comes in, to keep his job, he has to cut more than what is there in order to show profit. Okay, and way back when, let's say in the 50s, if you had an operating ratio of 82, it was good. Then it had to go to the 70s. In the 70s, that operating ratio had to go down into the 70s. Yeah. And now they're talking an operating ratio into the 60s,
yeah.
And they want to go to like 60, you know, 61, 60.
Yeah.
And it's because, like John said, when we started, a 5-man crew. Okay, yeah, the firemen went away pretty quick, but there was 3 people on the ground. Then they went to 2 people on the ground, and you carried radios. All right, you got an extra $12 for carrying that radio. So that they paid you $12, but they saved $100 on the guy that disappeared. Okay, and every time that guy disappeared, they say, well, if you were ready to retire, they bought out 5,000 guys. Okay, but if you weren't ready to retire at that exact moment, you lost out. Some people made out like bandits. If you were ready to retire exactly when they did away with one man, they handed you $30,000 or $40,000 and said, "Here you go, thank you." And when that guy left, he took that job with him. So every time a guy left, my seniority went right back down to the bottom. Okay, and then they got rid of the brakeman altogether, and then it was just the conductor. Once again, somebody got bought out. Somebody that was ready to retire, made a lot of money, bought a boat, sailed off. Okay, Joe Blow that was still working, he's now riding in on every train, on every cut, riding back out to the switch, throwing the switch, getting on, and riding all the way in and making the next move. Okay, and I remember when the Susquehanna took over, they went to two-man crews right away. And John Shreen, who was a famous Susquehanna man, called me up one night, and he just wanted to talk. And we talked for like an hour and a half. And he said, they're making old brakemen out of young railroaders up in Binghamton. He was talking about up in Binghamton at the time.
Just burning them out.
And, yeah, in other words, physically killing them because of what you had to do. What you used, 3 people used to do, now you do. And some people can't fathom that, but it was physically demanding, and you still did all the paperwork that a conductor had to do. So.
Yeah, just a lot of the stuff that used to be in-house, track work, repairs on the equipment and stuff. A lot of places are all contracted out because they can get it done at a lower rate, pay people less. They don't have to carry the insurance on them, the liability issues and all that. So it's a lot different than it was. And, you know, I mean, we have radios, we have telemetry and all of that.
You talk about track work, which I remember I told you for 17 months I worked for the Morristown and Erie. And they may run freight 2 or 3 days a week. And those other days, or even if we got done early, we would go out and do track work. And I don't mean mechanical track work, I'm talking about physical labor track work. I coined the term moose tie. Moose ties were these great big huge ties before there was a standard rectangle shaped tie. The tie would go like this, and it was an old oak tree, and it was twice as wide, but the main thing is it was twice as heavy as a normal tie. So when you were digging out a moose tie, you really knew you had a moose tie as opposed to a normal tie. You know, and I learned a little bit about track work and everything during that time. So it was just one of the other things that I learned, you know, during my railroad career. You know, that between the passenger, the through freight, the yard freight, the selling tickets that one summer, and being a fireman the one summer, I was happy I did it all. Happy to have known John. Happy that our interview has now gone 2 hours, and we got to get going. Well, my wife and kids are still waiting on me, and I'm out there on the railroad.
Something never change. Well, I certainly want to thank the two of you because it's been a pleasure.
Did we cover everything you were looking for?
I think so. Yes, absolutely. And you did it with grace and certainly. With passion and emotion as well, because we explored quite a few things here, and not only just about the cutoff, because we want to talk about the cutoff, but more than that, and I really appreciate it, and want to thank you, very, very much.
And thank you, both of you, for the opportunity to do this. So, might be some generation down the road after it. What was a train? What are we talking about?
Well, YouTube, we hope, is forever. So, and who knows? Sometime 100 years from now, we'll be looking at this, and it'll be
in a museum.
Perhaps, I don't know.
Superintendent of all short line railroading east of the Mississippi. Better him than me. I got other things to do.
Yeah. So.
Well, thank you, though. Really, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so our interview is over. We covered a whole slew of different subjects and I'll say issues, but and a lot of experience there talking to Bob and to John. This is the humble office that we conducted the interview in at Rockport. Of course, Rockport is a name that's familiar for those who know about the old road, the Lackawanna Old Road, and while it's not here that the actual Rockport wreck actually took place, that's a little bit of east of here. You know, that name is certainly familiar to people who know the Lackawanna. So there you have it. I hope you have enjoyed, and I certainly have to say I really enjoyed this particular part 23, and that you look forward to part 24 on the Lackawanna Cut-Off.